and welcome to another episode of Bud Light Predictions Amongst Friends. This is a special episode. We're broadcasting to you live from down in Midtown Atlanta. Hans Heiser alongside Matt Stewart. Good to see you, brother. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, I did not think I would be coming down to Midtown this week, but here I am. We're down in Zocalo's Cantina down here off of Piedmont and 10th Street. Come on down here. They'll have games on all day. Great food, and we'll be here with you for the next half hour, breaking down, of course, the big college football semifinal games, the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl. We're going to take a look at some other ones as well. But yesterday, some pretty good games with the SEC. Texas A&M comes up a little bit short. What was a heck of a football game. And Kentucky, wouldn't you know it, one play at the end of the game, 2-point conversion for the win. Story of their season, they come up a little bit short.
You know, that kind of takes me back to the season opener for Georgia Tech and Tennessee. Tech was kind of facing a similar situation in overtime. This was the end of regulation. Do you go for the win right there when you have the opportunity? You know, and I think from Mark Stoops' standpoint, from Kentucky's standpoint, it's a smart play to make. If you have a chance to win the game right there, you go for it. Now, the play call, the pass right there, not so sure about that, and they had lost their top running back. He had been kicked out of the ball game early in the first half. But so that maybe eliminated one of your options. But it was a smart thing to do, but you're right. It was kind of like the Kentucky season, going back to the Florida game. How many close games do they have where they made a play or did not make a play, I should say, at the end of the ball game? And that was kind of the way it ended for them. And Northwestern, a 9-win team this year.
No doubt. And listen, I will give full credit where credit's due, because I was hearing all the hype about Northwestern's run defense. And forgive me if I put a little bit of a pause of hesitation talking about some of these Big Ten schools' defenses in big games, but that run defense was completely legit. I mean, they were completely legit, and I knew Kentucky was going to throw the ball in that situation because they couldn't run the ball all day. But 7-6, nice season, could have been a lot more. I think the more interesting story yesterday is Texas A&M against Wake Forest. Tip your cap to Wake Forest. They had an outstanding season. But Luke Starkman, man, he's the quarterback of the future. If you're Jimbo Future, Nick Starkman. I mean, if you're Jimbo Fisher coming in next year, offensively, you feel like you got some good pieces. But you got to address that defense.
Yeah, I think that's the big story. And I want to go back to one thing before we touch on Texas A&M here. What you said about the Big Ten defenses, I think it's the Urban Meyer effect and how he has changed the recruiting culture in the Big Ten. You know, the Big Ten that you always thought of the Big Ten traditionally as the bigger and plotting guys, the farm boys, that kind of stuff. I think Urban Meyer at Ohio State and what he has done recruiting-wise has had an impact effect. James Franklin, Penn State, same kind of thing. Harbaugh has kind of changed the culture to where they're more along the lines of what the SEC has done for over a decade now, and that's recruit speed, and your best athletes play on the defensive side of the ball and not on the offensive side of the ball. And I think you're kind of seeing that a little bit in the Big Ten because of the coaching changes that have come in that conference and the impact they've had from a recruiting standpoint. As far as Texas A&M, now we start the Jimbo Fisher era.
Right.
You know, it's done now. The Kevin Sumlin era is officially over. 55-52, you're right. I mean, Nick Starkel, $4.99. You got to be pleased with the offense. They are probably losing Christian Kirk to the NFL. He had 13 catches, 3 touchdowns, but he's likely gone after this year. But the defensive component is the thing that Jimbo Fisher and the Aggies really got to address this year. They gave up 40-plus points in 5 games this year. UCLA, Auburn, LSU, Arkansas, they went 1-4 in those games, as you would expect. The fact that they even won one of those games, giving up 40 points, and that was the overtime victory against Arkansas early in the season. But address the defensive component for Texas A&M. And I think the Aggies fans have to be excited about what they have offensively. We know Fisher can do offensively. Address the defensive question marks, and I think it'll be interesting to see what he does at A&M, and now that era has started.
Yeah, and Chavis is gone, of course, now. He's the new defensive coordinator in Fayetteville, so we'll see how he does. We'll see how the defense is with Texas A&M. We do have to talk about the Cotton Bowl, back to that Big Ten defense. I thought that was the story of the game last night for Ohio State. That defensive line, from the very opening snap until the end of the game, they dominated.
Yeah.
I mean, those guys were completely legit, and they're mostly coming back next year. I know you're very high on Ohio State. You felt like maybe they should have been in as a conference champion over Alabama.
Yeah,
they proved it last night that they at least belonged in the conversation.
And that's the only reason why, because, we can get into semantics here about the playoff. We we can talk until this time next year about that, because I'm a firm believer you win your conference championship, you get in the playoff. I would even have, if you don't want to go 8, I'd go 5 and have the 5 conference champions and make the 4 and 5 seed play a wild card game to get into the 14 mix. But I believe that strongly about conference champions. Not necessarily that Ohio State's better than Alabama. We can't know that. They didn't play this year on the football field, and we won't know that because they're not going to play this year on the football field. But defensively, you're right. They sacked Sam Darnold 8 times. They stripped him twice. He threw a pick 6. The story really
was a horrible throw.
Yeah,
pick 6.
It was a boring game, scoreless in the second half. Ohio State got the lead. They put the shutdown on him. And the focus is on Sam Darnold because of potential NFL decision he's got to make here by January 15th. And is he going to go? Is he going to stay? And that's a decision he's got to make. But, take some of the focus off J.T. Barrett, who broke Drew Brees' Big Ten total offense record. He was responsible for 147 touchdowns, passing and running in his career. 38-6 as a starter. He got overshadowed a little bit by all the conversation about Sam Darnold and whether he's going to the NFL. And Ohio State did this with their All-American cornerback Denzel Ware sitting out the game because he didn't want to get hurt, and he's protecting him. Denzel Ward, I should say, protecting himself for the NFL draft.
The one thing about Barrett, when I've watched him for years play, the thing about him, he's got a heart. He's got a Valentine. He's got all the leadership intangibles that you want in a 5-year quarterback. Ohio State finishes the year on a high. Now, we got to break down the other games. We encourage you guys to be a part of our show here on Facebook Live. A lot of trash talk going towards the SEC saying, hey, look, these guys are 0-3. Well, that's because most of the SEC schools play on New Year's Day. But they were in all 3 of those games. They could have had a chance to win them, but they are 0-3 where it stands.
0-3, and I think they'll be 0-4 after today. I just don't like it. That's a tough matchup for them. They've lost so much. Mullen's gone. Grantham's gone. Fitzgerald, your quarterback, has had, broke his ankle. He's not playing in this game. You got to play Lamar Jackson in Louisville.
Right.
I just see a big, I think like a 31-10, if not worse, victory for the Cardinals today with the Bulldogs in the Tax Slayer Bowl, which is now underway in Jacksonville.
I'm sure Bobby Petrino would let up on him a little bit in the second half. If things started to get a little one-sided,
no doubt.
They would let up on him. So a traditional Rose Bowl matchup, Big Ten, Pac-12 schools that you have between that you would typically see in the Rose Bowl. Washington going against Penn State. They just because Ohio State's played in the Fiesta Bowl so many times, they flip-flopped. Of course, they played in the Cotton Bowl last night. They won their game, but they're going to be playing in the Fiesta Bowl this year. Penn State and Washington, 2 schools who I think came up a little bit short of what their ultimate goal is. I think this on paper is a nice matchup. You look at the running attack, obviously led by Saquon Barkley and Penn State against this Washington defense, which really doesn't allow anybody to run the football against.
Yeah, you look at now Washington's defense did. I mean, they were very good this year, but they gave up 247 yards rushing to Oregon late in the season. They did win that game 38-3, but they also gave up 195 to Bryce Love and Stanford, and they lost that game.
Which is the best comparison.
I think the Bryce Love, Sure. So, I mean, I think there's pause for concern right there. Like Mark Twain says, there's 3 kind of lies. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So we can take statistics and we can twist them any way we want to try to make our argument work. But I think there is pause for concern there going up against Saquon Barkley. But also from the Penn State standpoint, they're going up against Myles Gaskin. He had close to 1,300 yards rushing for the Huskies this year, 19 touchdowns, a school record 43 career touchdowns rushing. So I think that's pause for concern right there. And I think you're right. This is a nice traditional matchup. A little bit of Fiesta Bowl trivia here. I mean, the Nittany Lions are 6-0 all-time in the Fiesta Bowl. This is the site of one of the biggest wins in school history when they won the national championship in 1986 and beat Miami in the Fiesta Bowl. And for Washington coach Chris Peterson, it's probably the site of the signature victory of his coaching career when he was at Boise State.
Best all-time moments in college football. It really was.
When they beat Oklahoma in overtime 43-42 back in 2005.
Yeah, and you look at the other side of the coach, James Franklin, and what he's done there in such a short amount of time, having to rebuild this program, which many people felt because of the reduced scholarships and just the hand that he was dealt, it was going to take 5, 6, 7 years, and a lot of people stayed away from that job for that reason.
Right.
What he's done in such a short amount of time is absolutely incredible. I don't think he gets enough credit for it.
No, I agree with you on that. I think he's one of the top coaches in America. He proved that.
He won at Vanderbilt.
To me, it's kind of a similar argument, if you will. Bear with me on this. Steve Spurrier cut his teeth in college football by winning an ACC championship at Duke, and then he went back to his alma mater and became one of the greatest coaches of all time, in my mind. Won at Florida, a place they'd never won any championships, and not only were they winning SEC championships, they became a national championship team. And I think you can make that same comparison with Peterson. Peterson winning at Vanderbilt, of course, didn't win a conference championship, but he won 9 games at Vanderbilt, and now he's getting the job done at Penn State. They lost their 2 games this year by a total of 4 points.
On the road.
1 point to Ohio State. Lost by a field goal to Michigan State, another good team. I think so. I mean, they had a great season. They just, and they were the team last year that I felt like should have been
no doubt
the playoff over Ohio State.
And you got to think that's going to play in here from a motivating factor for James Franklin. He's going to use anything he can to get his kids ready. And, I just look at what USC did last night. The Pac-12 as a whole in the bowl season has not been good. They've been absolutely terrible, 1-4, and I think that continues. I'm going to go with my Bud Light prediction. I'm going to go with Penn State. High-scoring game. I know Washington's defense has been a little bit stingy this year, but, it's bowl season. I'll even throw a score out there. You and I were, sending emails back and forth last night. I like Penn State. This was a close game. What did I put it down at? I have 27-24 field goal game. You got it close as well.
Yeah, I got 31-30. I think it's going to be a shootout, but I think it's going to be Trace McSorley, the Nittany Lions quarterback, that ends up being the MVP of this game, and not necessarily Saquon Barkley.
I do want to remind you to huddle up with your friends and some ice cold Bud Light, the beer that's famous amongst friends on game day and all season long. Hans Heiser, Matt Stewart down at Zocalo Cantina down in Swingin' Midtown on the corner of 10th and Piedmont. We'll continue to break down the bowl games. Next up on the list, we'll break it down the Orange Bowl as the turnover chain welcomes Wisconsin, who's favored in this game by 6. And I think it's interesting, we know about the turnover chain, 30 turnovers the Miami defense produced this season. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? Wisconsin turns it over about as much as anybody.
But Wisconsin also produced 26 turnovers themselves defensively. They just didn't have a chain. They didn't have a big badger hanging around.
Could you imagine if Wisconsin had a turnover chain?
What they should have had, instead of a turnover chain, the Badgers player should have had a big badger hat, like with a big badger mouth and hairy hat that they stuck on their head after they got a turnover. But they were nearly as prolific as Miami. Miami rode the crest of that turnover chain. I thought it was brilliant, this seemed like this was the year of the gimmick. It started out, unfortunately for Tennessee, with the garbage can, and their season went.
How did that go?
Yeah, well, it went in the garbage can, and Butch Jones is still trying to get out of that garbage can and find himself, a new job and everything. But you're right. Hornibrook has committed a lot of turnovers. He's thrown interceptions in 10 of his 13 games, 15 total interceptions, I think. But I just get the feeling, just based on Miami's last 2 games, they've kind of run out of steam a little bit. Malik Rozier did not finish the season well. He's down 2 of his top pass catchers in this game. They're both out with knee surgeries. I think I like Wisconsin in this game a little bit if they can stay away from the turnover, because that's what fuels Miami. If Wisconsin's sloppy with the ball, then Miami might win this game, probably will win this game. But I think if they take care of it, they're okay.
The one thing Miami's got going in their favor, they were really good at home this year.
Yep.
They were really good at home. This is a de facto home game for them down there at Sun Life Stadium, unless they've changed the name of the stadium between now this morning and then, which they very well might have. They very well might have. But
to be Hard Rock.
You can't keep up with it.
Isn't it Hard Rock?
I have no idea. Okay. Honestly, I can't keep up with it. But I think Miami's offensively, you hit on it right there. They're really struggling. They lost their tailback early on in the season. I think this is a low-scoring game. Wisconsin all season long, they kind of grind it out. Miami, if they don't get any defensive touchdowns in this one, I expect Wisconsin to walk out of there with a victory. My Bud Light prediction, Wisconsin 24, Miami 14 in the Orange Bowl. I like Big Ten in this game.
Yeah, I'm going to go 23-21. I do like Wisconsin in this game as well. If they stay away from the turnover. Now, if they're sloppy with the football, as they have been at times this season, and because, let's face it, they didn't play the toughest schedule in the world, they were able to survive that.
Right.
But I think if they can give the ball to Jonathan Taylor, who was the top freshman running back in the country. In fact, he's just 79 yards away.
Yeah, Heisman dark horse next year.
No doubt about it. Right. He finished 6th in the Heisman balloting this year because he rushed for close to 1,800 yards. I mean, he's right there, 79 yards away from breaking Adrian Peterson's freshman record for running backs. He did average 142.
I think he's going to get that today.
And he only needs 79. But he did lose 5 fumbles this year. So
unless he goes Benny Snell and he's thrown out of the game early.
So he was a little bit culpable in the turnover problems for Wisconsin this year. But if they stay away from the turnovers, I like them 23-21.
So there you go. Matt and I both on Wisconsin. It's our Bud Light prediction. There's only one thing to rally behind: tailgating with ice-cold Bud Light all season long. Right down the street here, there's going to be the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl game taking place coming up on New Year's Day. And Central Florida, we know the darlings of college football this year, 12-0. They did everything they were supposed to do except for the hurricane cancellation game against Georgia Tech. But they ran the table. They won their conference in an overtime victory against Memphis. They've done it simply by outscoring folks. Now their opponent comes in here, the Auburn Tigers, a team it was almost unfathomable the run they went on at the end of the season. 2/3 of the way there, they just couldn't have enough left. I think a lot of that had to do with the health of Kerryon Johnson, who is healthy in this football game.
Well, and here's the other thing. I mean, and you hear coaches at every level talk about this all the time. It's hard to beat a team a second time, especially when the games are played in such close proximity. Because you win the game, what adjustments are you making if you win the game? Your thought process, we're going to come back out, do what we did. Right. It worked the first time. It's the second team, the team that lost the game, is the team that makes the adjustments.
When they're evenly matched.
Sure. Yeah, if the teams aren't evenly matched, it doesn't matter. But when the teams are evenly matched, like Georgia and Auburn were in that game, Georgia is in the advantage because they can look back, they go, okay, this is where we've got to make the adjustment.
And it wasn't in Jordan Hare, which helped as well.
No doubt about it. So, UCF gave up 42 points in a 49-42 win against South Florida. They gave up 48 in regulation.
97 their last 2 games they've given up.
That ain't happening again. Well, it may happen that they give up that many against Auburn, but they're not scoring, 48 in regulation like they did against Memphis, 49 like they did against South Alabama. I think they will score, but Auburn did not give up more than 28 points at any time during the regular season. So, obviously, I think you know where we're going with this prediction. So,
I will say this: for the non-Power 5 in the college football playoff era, they're 2-1. They're 2-1 in these big bowl games. I understand that, but
one was a victory over Georgia.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you 100% that this thing gets out of hand. I got it 56-28 Auburn. You go back and you watch that Georgia game. Now, granted, everything you just said was true about the preparation, the difficulty with the matchup 2 weeks in a row. Kerryon Johnson was a liability in that game. I mean, you watch him carry the football. I went back and watched it. He was not even close to the same player that he was all season long. He's going to be the bell cow in this one. Doesn't look like Petway's going to go. If he's getting the ball 20, 25 times, I know it doesn't matter, but he changes everything for that team offensively.
You're right. It matters. It matters that you have Kerryon Johnson healthy. If he's healthy, it doesn't matter that you don't have Petway. He rushed for over 1,300 yards, had 19 touchdowns. Stidham was number 2 in the SEC in passing yards, number 1 in the conference in completion percentage. And how about the quote from UCF running back Adrian Killins, who said the Tigers haven't seen speed like we have? Wrong. They play in the SEC,
but I like how they didn't get involved going back and forth.
You wouldn't. Why would you? Come on. Adrian, you're playing in the American Conference. Auburn plays in the SEC every week. They see that speed, not every week. They see that speed every day in practice. So giving Auburn bulletin board material. I know there's questions about Auburn's motivation, and last year when we had this matchup last time in Atlanta, the Group of 5 versus the Power 5, Houston put it on Florida State. So there's always that question about the motivation. Obviously, from the standpoint, the Group of 5 team, has all to play for there because they're the underdog always in this matchup. But I think Auburn's got a lot to play for. They got a lot to play for. Finish the season strong, get to 11 wins. I like Auburn to win at 42-28.
Tip your cap to Scott Frost for doing that. He gets his dream job in Nebraska, but staying dialed in with his program, that's got to be difficult. I mean, you're talking about recruiting. One's in Nebraska, one's in Orlando.
And I think you got to talk about that. We've heard criticism. We heard criticism from the Missouri players about Josh Heupel leaving the team as the offensive coordinator of the Missouri Tigers because he's replacing Scott Frost at UCF as the head coach. We heard criticism of that. We've seen most of the time these coaches, when they get the job, they leave. So I don't know what's the better thing because. I don't know whether we'll have an answer after they play this game or not. But as a coach who's got divided attention, better than just having a group of coaches, whether they're the head coach or not, who are totally focused on trying to win this game. And even then, you don't get that, because the coaches that are left behind in that situation, they're on the phone call trying to get their next job.
Sure.
They're on the phone trying to get their next job. So it's a difficult situation whenever you lose your coach, and we'll see how it plays out. But I agree. It's nice that Scott Frost stuck with the team through this final game, but we'll see if it means anything.
Yeah, I think this one gets one-sided. My Bud Light prediction: Auburn 56, UCF 28. All right, moving along. Do want to remind you, we are brought to you by Bud Light. We're down in Ocala Cantina down in Midtown Atlanta, and you got to do some tailgating with your friends at Bud Light. Huddle up all season long. Ice cold Bud Light, the beer that's famous amongst friends, all season long. And now we got the two all season long. It's ending up to this, and what has been a down season for the SEC as a whole has the national semifinals with one school represented in each game. Georgia, of course, taking on Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl, and that's the game that we'll break down first. I talked to my friends last night who were out in California. They are having the time of their life.
No doubt.
What a I don't even know where to start with this one. I mean, you're talking about the venue, the history, the fact that Georgia hasn't played in this game in almost 65, 70 years, and then you bring the Heisman Trophy.
Nobody but the Pac-12 conference and the Big Ten have played in this game basically forever for the last 100 years. You had the old conference tie-ins to the Rose Bowl, and so they had it locked up, and so an SEC team could never play under the old bowl format, and under which we still existed even in the BCS. You couldn't have an SEC team playing in this game.
Then you get the Heisman Trophy winner, who, by the way, he's been ill all week with some kind of stomach virus. Hasn't been a part of any of the team activities, doing the Disneyland and stuff. But it wasn't 1 day. It wasn't 2 days. It's been 4 days now. So at this point,
I think it's a little convenient.
Right.
I think it's a little convenient. Keep him out of the spotlight, because they're having media day today, right? Is Alabama and Clemson, is Georgia? They're also having their media day today. Yeah, so they are. Yeah, so they are. They're 3 hours behind us. This is to keep him out of the spotlight, because if Baker Mayfield shows up at media day, where do you think 99.9% of the media are going to flock to all of a sudden? They're going right there to Baker Mayfield, even more so than Lincoln Riley, to talk to this guy.
They're the same age, by the way.
Yeah, and see if Baker Mayfield's going to drop a nugget or something, something a little inflammatory. We don't have to go through the history. We know what he's done this year at Ohio State. He did it with Kansas and all this kind of stuff. And there's going to be guys there in the media just hoping that he's going to do something.
He would have
to give us a headline.
He's yet to prove that he can keep his mouth shut.
Yeah, to light this thing up a little bit. So I think it's convenient. I'm not saying that he hasn't been sick. I think he has been sick. I think that the fact
convenient.
It's been a convenient excuse to keep him out of the spotlight, keep him out of the limelight, keep him away from reporters, keep him under wraps a little bit. So it's worked out well for them in that regard.
I will say this. I thought it was very interesting, Lorenzo Carter's comments earlier in the week, talking about he's been telling his defensive teammates that their goal should be to keep Baker Mayfield quiet. And I think that's interesting, because when you watch Oklahoma play, he's grabbing himself, he's pointing at people, he's talking trash, much like a guy like Cam Newton, where once things start rolling positivity, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you can keep him shut, we all had that guy growing up with. You know what I mean? He was more talented than everybody else.
And he
let everybody know. But guess what? Those guys have bad days. And when they do, they tuck their tail between their legs and they quit. I'm not saying Baker Mayfield can do that, but I know one thing. If you let him get on that emotional roll and he's playing with a lot of confidence, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. I thought it was a great quote by Lorenzo Carter, very observant on that defensive side of the ball.
Watching ESPN Game Day or Countdown, whatever they were calling it this morning, I agree with Mack Brown. Mack Brown said, Georgia's got to play this game kind of like, the way Army and Navy won their bowl games. And, I think the Army victory over San Diego State was one of the most thrilling games. We've had a lot of close games that went right down to the wire last play, but Army winning, who doesn't pull for Army?
Right.
You're pulling for Army and Navy to win. I mean, those are our service academies. You want to see I felt bad for San Diego State because
don't forget about Georgia Tech. We have a service academy here in Atlanta as well.
How's that a service academy?
The offense that they run.
Oh, I got
the jerky high school offense that they run.
But I'm not talking about strategies here. I'm talking about service academies. So I felt bad for San Diego State because everybody's pulling for Army to win this game, and then they went for the 2 and they won it and didn't go to overtime and all that kind of stuff. But Mack Brown was making the point that Georgia needs to play their game a little bit like that, not totally like that, but in that game, Army ran 90 plays. They had the ball, I think, for 44 minutes time of possession. San Diego State had the ball for 13 minutes time of possession.
Imagine being on the sidelines during that game.
And they nearly won.
Right.
And they nearly, even just running 30 plays and having it for just 13-plus minutes, they nearly won the game. I think Georgia needs to control the tempo of this game. I know it sounds cliche. You don't want to fall behind and get into a shootout chase with Oklahoma, but you run the ball. If you're able to run the ball, and that doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure that out with Nick Chubb and Sony Michel and DeAndre Swift. If you can run the football, control the game, run a lot of plays, hold on to the football, that's the way Georgia wins this game. And I think they want to keep it in the 20s. I don't think you want to get a game that's in the 30s. I think you want to keep the score range in the 20s.
Well, Oklahoma's defense has been so poor this year. You saw that Big 12 elite defense the other night. TCU, how did they look? Really, honest to God. All season long I hear about how great TCU's defense is. Give me a freaking break. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, and what goes on in the Big 12, and you're right, Oklahoma gave up 38-plus points in 3 games this season. What goes on in the Big 12 is, look, you can't just look at a game, and you know this, you can't just look at a game and say, well, the offense is this and the defense is that. It all ties in together. But when you run that style of offense that they run in the Big 12, your defense is going to get lit up because the offenses are going up and down the field, up and down and field, up and down.
Auburn manages to multitask.
Yeah, but Auburn does things differently in that they're playing with tempo, and tempo doesn't mean you're always playing fast.
Right.
Tempo means sometimes you're throttling it back and you're being methodical in your run game and you're controlling the clock.
It's a chess match.
Yeah, and so you can run the ball, you can play with tempo, run the ball, and still control the clock.
As far as controlling the clock, it's easy to just look at it and say, well, we're going to run the ball, we're going to control the clock, but there's some things you can do defensively to help do that as well. If you shut down Oklahoma's running attack, they average over 200 yards a game, right? And you're forcing them to throw it continually. You get incomplete passes, whatever the cases may be. They're stopping the clock themselves. So there's an opportunity there for a game plan standpoint. If you say, look, you're not running the football, we're not going to put one more extra guy in the box. We're just going to play it straight up with 7. And if you can't run the football, I think that sets up for a long day for Oklahoma offensively and just gives the ball right back to Georgia with that 3-headed monster you mentioned.
The freshman running back, Trey Sermon from Sprayberry High School.
Right.
One of the top running backs for Oklahoma this year. And Rodney Anderson, Abdul Adams, they got a stable at wide receiver. They got a lot of weapons. I think the key for Georgia is to keep those weapons off the field, control the game with your running game. And Oklahoma obviously wants to do what Auburn did, and that's like stuff the run game. I think Georgia averaged less than 2 yards per carry against Auburn. Stuff the run game. Make this a game that Jake Fromm has to win. And I don't know, you get into that type of situation, as much as you fans, I know, Bulldog fans love Jake Fromm, and for good reason. I don't think you want it to be a Jake Fromm versus Baker Mayfield kind of game.
No, you definitely don't. I think most people lean on the better quarterback in a matchup like this, much like the Sugar Bowl, which we'll talk about in a second as far as which way I'm leaning. I think this is a special season for Georgia. I don't know how far it goes, but I like Georgia in this game. My Bud Light prediction is, and I think it is high scoring because I think Jake Fromm's going to be able to throw for 250, 300 yards against this defense. I just have not seen anything from Oklahoma's defense, but with that said, the Auburn game, they held Auburn to 7 points. From a game plan standpoint, you were able to say, look, we're not going to let the wide receiver screen beat us. We're not going to let the run beat us. With Oklahoma, I don't know what you do because everything breaks down. It's like Johnny Football. It's like, how do you game plan for a guy where you're just playing in the backyard? So I think they're going to get theirs. I think Georgia's going to get theirs. High-scoring game, 38-33 Dogs. I know that's not where you want to be.
I don't think that's the recipe for a Georgia win. I think a 250 to 300-yard passing game for Jake Fromm is bad news for Georgia. Georgia's run game needs to be in that 250 300-yard range. I think if you're relying on Fromm to throw that many yards, that means you're playing from behind and you're trying to play catch-up. You're in a shootout with Oklahoma. Like I said before, I think the 30-point range, that's a bad number. If Oklahoma's in the 30-point range, Georgia's losing this game. I like Georgia, though, 24-23.
Will, I do want to update you on what's taking place in the Tax Slayer Bowl. Of course, the old Gator Bowl, 7-7. Early on, midway through the first quarter, so we'll get you one more score update on that before we get out of here. We're broadcasting you live from Zocalo Latin Cantina down here on 10th Street in Piedmont, down in Midtown Atlanta, and the other national semifinal Then, of course, the Sugar Bowl taking place in New Orleans. That will be the later of the two, scheduled for an 8:30, 8:45 kickoff after the Rose Bowl. And what can you say about this? Third time. They've gone each way, Alabama, Clemson. And what's interesting about this game to me, obviously no Deshaun Watson, so things might change as far as from a point standpoint. But the last couple of years, you looked at the game on paper and said, well, this is going to be a low-scoring slobber knocker. You know, they've been shootouts.
Yeah, they have been. And I think what Alabama showed in those two games, the one that they won, the one that they lost, is Alabama can play, or they used to be able to play that kind of game. Can this Alabama team play that kind of game? We haven't seen them have to play. The closest thing they played to a game like that, a shootout kind of game, was the Mississippi State game, where they had to come from behind in the fourth quarter behind Jalen Hurts and win the ball game. So, yeah, that'll be interesting. But the other interesting thing is Deshaun Watson. That's a big piece of the puzzle to take out of. And now you got Kelly Bryant, who had a fine freshman season, close to 2,700 yards passing, 13 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 11 rushing touchdowns. But, how he fares in this game. And last year you had a decided quarterback advantage for Clemson. Deshaun Watson, the freshman Jalen Hurts, even though he was the player of the year in the SEC, the freshman Jalen Hurts for Alabama. This year, Jalen Hurts takes that spot a little bit. I mean, he only threw 1 interception, 15 touchdowns, and he did show an ability. He won that Mississippi State game. He won that game.
He made a throw in that game that's as good as a throw as you can make in football. I want to ask you about Jalen Hurts. What is it about him that some people view him, and Alabama fans primarily, as he's not the answer? There's some people that question him.
I think
I just think it's amazing to me because I watch him play, and I'm like, I think most people would like to have Jalen Hurts as their quarterback.
Well, because he doesn't fit into. We get so wrapped up in stats, and Baker Mayfield threw for close to 5,000 yards, so it's easy to look at that and say, "Wow."
Well, he doesn't have Damian Harris and Bo Scarborough, so
exactly. I mean, and most of the time, Jalen Hurts is playing with a lead, and Alabama doesn't have to pass. But when they do have to pass, I'm confident in his ability to lead the team and to pass it and to run it. And Jalen Hurts was the number 2 rusher on this Alabama team. So when we get caught up in stats, I think it hasn't. You have a problem there sometimes. And stats are good; they can tell the story, but sometimes they don't tell all the story. I think Hurts is a fine quarterback, and they didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher on this Alabama team this year. It's because they've got 3 guys, but they rush for over 300 yards per game, so they get the job done. They just don't do it, with the one back, and they don't do it with the one star quarterback. Although Jalen Hurts, I'll tell you, he's a star quarterback in my book.
So let's talk about the coaches. Obviously, Nick Saban, been there, done that, won 5 of these things, 4 of them in Alabama. When Sweeney took the job at Clemson, I remember people like, this guy's such a goober. I mean, honestly, this guy, he was so old. He was just outlandish and just different. And what he's done is he's reached these young players, and it turns out he can coach, he can delegate, and he's kind of like this new age Nick Saban. If they win this game, I'm not saying he's leaping over Nick Saban, but he's in the conversation with some of these other. He already is.
Yeah, well, he's got to be. That's right. National championships. I mean, if they win this game and then win the next and become the national champions. Sure. But I think he's already. I think he's already in that conversation. Now, you can't put him above Nick Saban, who has 5 national championships in 4 and 10 years at Alabama, because in that case, I mean, that's a stat. That's a number that's too hard to ignore. But Sweeney is in there with everybody else. I mean, there's Nick Saban, and then there's everybody.
And
then there's the next.
And he's the youngest out of all of them.
And then there's the next tier. There's Urban Meyer.
Sure.
And he's in that group with Urban Meyer. And then after those guys, then I think maybe it's. I mean, maybe we got Nick. And then you got
Malzahn, Jimbo Fisher.
Yeah, but they're not in that group.
Right, they're not in that group. No doubt.
You got Urban Meyer, and then you got Sweeney. And so that's 1 and 2. And then you got your next group, 3, and maybe Malzahn and Jimbo Fisher and guys like that are in that group.
I just think it's remarkable what he's accomplished. You look at the facilities there at Clemson. Clemson, much like Georgia for years, and they had that success in the early 80s, right? So you have the symmetry there. But you just always looked at least I did. I looked at those 2 programs, the history there, the recruiting base they were in, and just you always said if they ever got the right guy in there, man, they would just absolutely kill it. Kind of like Kentucky basketball. They were sleeping for years. Like if they ever hire the right guy, they're going to kill it.
Yeah.
And so they found their guy, and it looks like Georgia might have found their guy as well. This is
What I will say about Clemson recruiting, though, it's a tougher recruit. It's a tougher recruit than, say, Georgia, because at Clemson, South Carolina is a small population state. I mean, if you don't believe me, just go look at all the recruiting rankings and how many players are nationally ranked out of the state of South Carolina compared to Georgia and Florida and Texas. And so at Clemson, you gotta stretch your borders a little bit. Georgia's able to do this too, but Georgia is in a great situation, kind of like LSU. If you can control your state,
right,
you ought to be good all the time. Clemson's got to get into Georgia. Clemson's got to get what's in South Carolina. They got to get into Georgia. They've got to get into Florida.
And that's why Georgia had such a great class this year. They were able to control their state. But that's easier said than done when you're talking about Auburn, Alabama. Used to be Tennessee, Clemson, Florida State, Florida. All these guys pulling out of Georgia. Right. But Dabo, the job he's done there, the facilities, everything he's done, it's outstanding. Losing a coordinator, of course, Chad Morris is gone. They haven't skipped a beat. And you lose the Heisman Trophy, or what should have been the Heisman Trophy, Deshaun Watson. And well, you can make an argument either way. I mean,
they were both deserving, and Lamar Jackson was.
Right. So, but either way, Kelly Bryant, what have you seen out of him this year that leads you to believe that he is the answer and good enough to win this football?
No, I don't think Kelly Bryant is the answer in this game. I think the answer in this game are defenses, and I think we have two pretty evenly matched defenses. Now, with Clemson, you got to know, okay, what happened in the Syracuse game there? And Alabama certainly didn't have anything like that. And to me, that remained one of the big mysteries to me with the college football rankings is that, with Clemson, they just seem to totally ignore.
Well, Bryant got hurt in that game.
Yeah, but but still, they seem to ignore the fact that they lost to Syracuse, what didn't even win? What did they win? 4 or 5 games this year?
Sure.
And that seemed like that was never an issue with them, but they always pointed out the warts and the blemishes on everybody else, but they never stopped to talk about that one with Clemson. But getting back to what you were saying right there, I don't think it's Kelly Bryant that wins this game. He's going to have a good game. There's no doubt about it. But I think it's the defenses. I think the defenses are evenly matched, and I think that Clemson as a whole offensively is just a tad bit better.
I just don't know how you beat Alabama again. I think they give them the extra time to get healthy. Of course, they do end up losing Moses.
But who is Alabama?
They haven't played anybody.
Well, I mean, they played everybody on their schedule. So, I mean, I don't like to get into that argument. They played who they were supposed to play. Sure. I mean, you can't change your schedule in the middle of the season and say, oh, wow, our schedule's not
well, but I'm using that as an argument as to why they shouldn't have been left out because they didn't play anybody.
No, I agree with that. But what I'm saying is the teams that they did play, they did, there was nothing outstanding about their resume to me. They played a kind of a mediocre game against Texas A&M. Mississippi State, they had to come back and beat. So anybody, and then they got beat by Auburn. They beat Florida State, and Florida State, if you look at the ESPN FBI, they still have them ranked in the top 20. I think Florida State's a talented team. That season just got off the rails early when DeAndre Francis got hurt in the opening game of the season. So I don't discount their win over Florida State, but I just haven't seen anything that's totally impressive enough about Alabama to me this season that leads me to believe, all of a sudden they've had a month off, we're going to flip the switch and we're going to see Alabama of the last 2 years.
Right. You could be right. Time will tell. I like Alabama in this game. I think it's a relatively low-scoring game, 24-14. I'll say Alabama gets the win, and whoever survives this game, the Rose Bowl is going to go into a team playing against an opponent who's going to be pretty beaten up. Because it's going to be, you know what I'm saying? Not that Oklahoma or Georgia or Patsies or anything, but I'm saying this is going to be, you have to think like one of those Alabama LSU bloodbath type games.
I think, I think it's a low-scoring game as well, and I'm going to differ from you on this one. I'm going to go Clemson 21-17.
And with that being said, you kind of tipped your cap earlier when you said, tipped your hand rather, you said, well, if they win that national championship, so are you under the assumption the winner of this game wins the championship?
No, I'm not at all. I think kind of alluding to what you were saying right there. You got to wait and see how these teams come out of the semifinal and see how they perform in this semifinal, because that's another litmus test. That's another piece of evidence. That's another bit of data that you need to ingest and kind of and look at before you make your prediction.
Mississippi State has just scored again, making it 14-7.
Well, they've already scored more points than I thought they would.
That's right.
So, everything I just said for the last 45 minutes, you can forget.
Hey, do you want to thank Bud Light, our sponsor here, for our show today? Bud Light Predictions Amongst Friends.
Can we make our last two predictions on the
Yeah. I just want to remind everybody, huddle up with your friends. It's Ice Cold Bud Light, the beer that's famous amongst friends all season long. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the other SEC games coming up on New Year's Day. Right. These are big games. Citrus Bowl.
Yeah, I like them.
Of course, the Outback.
I like them. And Outback Bowl. We'll just make our quick predictions here. I'm going to go Michigan 23-20. I think this is an interesting quarterback. Brandon Peters, now the starting quarterback for the Wolverines, so he's getting a jump on what Jim Harbaugh says is going to be an open quarterback competition for
Don't believe a word that guy says.
For the Wolverines' job in spring ball. I think the big key in this game is, golly, isn't it funny here, 2017, 2018, with all the offenses spread and everything, it still comes down, can you run the football? And I think if Michigan can run the football against South Carolina, which might be easier said than done, I like the Wolverines in this game. Karan Higdon did not have a good finish of the season for the Wolverines, but I'll go Michigan here in this one, 23-20, simply because I don't have a lot of faith in the Gamecocks offense, and I think Michigan can scratch out 23 against.
I think this matchup is so interesting in the fact that both defenses have the same game plan. They know that offensively they don't have the talent to put up a lot of points, right? They got question marks all over the field.
Absolutely.
And so defensively what they do is they bring everybody up and they say, we're not going to give up a big play. They both do the same thing. It is going to be an ugly, grinded out affair. Neither team's really turned the ball over much. I mean, they both coaches played very close to the vest. I wonder if one of them changes at this game and says, the hell with it. Let's do something different. Let's open things up a little bit.
I'd love to see the Gamecocks win it. I love Will Muschamp.
I've
been a huge Will Muschamp fan all my life, and he's a great guy. And I hope South Carolina wins it, but I think Michigan does.
I agree with you. I think I got a 21-7 Michigan in this
Wow,
game.
I got 23-20 Michigan. And the Citrus Bowl, this is Notre Dame and LSU.
Winners a 10-win season.
Indeed.
LSU, a little bit of controversy in-house right now.
Yeah, well, they're playing without their top three linebackers, and it looks like Matt Canada is going to be out as the OC after just one season. They struggled all season long. Offensively, don't let the last three games that they played fool you when they played mediocre/bad defenses in the SEC. LSU still struggles offensively, and now Matt Canada's on the way out. You got controversy there. You got three linebackers out. I think Notre Dame's going to want to run the ball with quarterback Brandon Wimbush and running back Josh Adams. I'm going to go Notre Dame in this game, 26-14 in the Citrus Bowl.
I'll just take a leap and think. I'll take LSU. I think they turned a corner. Troy, they competed in their two losses down the stretch.
No doubt. They got better.
Yeah, and so we'll see. I think both schools, it's going to be a heck of a game. Credit to Citrus Bowl for putting together a good matchup. That's a great matchup. That's one I'll be interested in. And who knows what the LSU offense will look like next year. I'll miss all those guys in motion running all over the place.
Yeah, they go back. Maybe Coach O is going to run the offense.
Oh, my God. Coach O needs to get out there and play. Hey, thank you guys very much for being a part of our show. Thank you to the folks at Zocala Cantina here in Midtown. Thanks to our esteemed staff back at the ranch down in Dunwoody. And thank you to everybody here for being part of the show. Matt, thank you very much, brother. Happy New Year, man. We'll do it again sometime soon.
Yeah,
all
absolutely.
Right. Thank you guys very much. Y'all have a great day. Happy New Year to you.